Hey guys, okay, we're going to review our first week terms about text structure and text analysis. So when we talk about text, what I mean is different articles or studies or research materials that you will read in this class. Now this text structure applies to argumentative texts, texts that are trying to put an idea forward and support it. You're not going to necessarily find arguments and claims in a fiction piece, right? It's not going to be in a poem. It's in nonfiction text that is all that we read in this class. This is a research class, right? So text structure, anytime you look at a text, like the example text that we've read so far, these are our exam texts, but anytime you read any article or argumentative piece of writing, you can break it down into these four components. Now they go in that inverted triangle because they are different scales. So a perspective is the widest scale of a text. Perspective is the worldview that it supports. It's the point of view that it supports. So let's say you're reading a text about gun ownership in America and how Americans need less access to guns. That's the perspective. It's the worldview that it supports. Now you can find texts from all different kinds of perspectives. Obviously, every text has a perspective, and you can find text that agree and disagree on that widest scale, which is its perspective. So texts also have one or multiple arguments within the text. And an argument is something that's disputable, that you can debate. It's an idea that you're trying to convince someone of. It's broken down. There's also an argument definition text on Schoology, but it's a pattern of reasoning that seeks to explain evidence and convince its reader. So that's an argument. That's the second widest kind of scale in the text. The next smallest scale is a claim. So arguments are made up of claims, and claims are also something debatable, and they seek to explain evidence. So you can often find claims in a text by just putting your finger on it. So an author is making a statement in the text. They're making a claim. And that's, again, often followed by evidence, which is hopefully a word that you know, but speaking about firsthand evidence or secondhand evidence. So firsthand evidence being like personal testimonies, scientific data, academically gathered statistics, things like that. Secondhand data is what in social studies you'd call like a secondary source, but that language needs to get more specific for this class. And secondhand evidence, as opposed to originating evidence, has a layer of analysis in the middle. So it's an expert talking about the originating source, or it's a politician talking about the laws, where the laws are the originating evidence, that firsthand evidence, and the politician is the secondhand evidence. We'll talk more about evidence, I think, next week, and there's a good video about it also on Schoology. So all four of those things are in a text and something that you can identify in a text. And that's why we have our PACE template. So I'm going to show you that PACE document. So at the top, you will see a space for the text title and the date that it was published, not the date that you're completing this. There's a summary paragraph, and the best place that I know to direct students to when they're doing a summary is the title of the piece. It often encapsulates exactly what the author wants to say and can give you clues to also the argument that it's making, and obviously what's covered in the text, and also in your summary paragraph including the author, the date, and the publisher. Now this isn't a place to copy evidence, okay? It doesn't need to be super detailed. It's just a short look at the document. Now the ones that we start with, these are 1 page, so it's not hard to summarize, but imagine a 10-page piece of research is going to be more of a challenge to summarize. The next box is for perspectives. The perspective that's communicated in the text, it's usually just one sentence. What point of view is that text coming from? What idea do they support? What side of the issue are they on? That kind of thing. The arguments in the text, now these first ones that we do, they really have kind of a singular argument that they're making, but larger texts will have multiple arguments, and those are often very clear sentences in the text what the author's trying to communicate, and then you can kind of see how the claims and evidence support those single statements. The claims are, again, those pieces of arguments, and hopefully these terms are familiar to you as a writer as well, because in your essays you're making arguments, but there are specific things you need to say as you're making those arguments that explain the evidence that you as a researcher are communicating to support the side that you're on, and that side being the argument. And evidence, we'll talk about evidence in detail, and there's some good videos to watch, but evidence can be, I think maybe we just talked about that. I had to make 2 videos. This is like a few minutes later, so sorry if I'm repeating myself, but there's that primary evidence, that originating evidence, like, you know, specific studies or data, legislation, firsthand accounts, that kind of thing. And then there's secondary evidence where there's a layer of analysis in between where somebody else is speaking about that, which is great too. You know, that's how we hear from experts and, you know, politicians or teachers in some cases. You know, other people are kind of getting in the middle of the evidence and explaining it to us, again, which is good, but also can be bad. So that's evidence. So this is the PACE document, and you could do these for anything you ever read that's argumentative. We won't do them through the whole year, but it's a scaffold here for you, so I want to show you that. Okay, now let's talk about text analysis, which is the second piece of our work this week. So we looked at text structure, its 4 components, and now we're going to look at 3 ways to analyze text. Now these words we will use throughout the entire semester, so get comfortable. And validation and evaluation are really like the main skills for this class and the main skills that we need in life today in such a highly digital, highly like media conscious, consuming, producing world. So validation is objective. It seeks to analyze the credibility of a source. So it looks at if the publisher is credible and the author and the information that's presented. And you do that by lateral reading, which is a video that you can also watch. You have to check like the different publications, right? You just open up a new tab in Google. You do a Google search. This first example that we have this year is from the Japan Times. Is that a good publication? You know? The first thing that I read about it was that it was the largest English language newspaper in Japan and the oldest, which is interesting to me. It speaks to an international community in Japan, a wide readership, and a global perspective, like a wide perspective. So in validating the source, reading about that objectively. Then we look at the author, their background. Are they an expert? Are they just a journalist? Are they just, you know, a standard person that's experiencing an issue? You know, what's their level of credibility? And so again, validation is objective. Everybody should have the same like validation of a source. Now, evaluation and judgment is where it gets a little bit different. When you evaluate a source or come to a judgment about it, that's more subjective. That can be based more on opinion and your own background as a reader, whether or not you value the source or depending on what your research question is. So let's look at that template. Okay, so here is the VEG template. This one is an example for the text 1 that we have this year. And the top is for the title and the date and the summary. Now you don't have to do this part if you've already done a PACE text or a PACE document for the text, because all that is already there. Don't want to repeat. And here's boxes for the validation, evaluation, and judgment. Now these gray questions can help frame your thinking. Again, objectively, what are the author's credentials and the publisher? Are the claims and the evidence and the argument good? Because you're validating the author and the evidence. You know, the background of who wrote it and what they're writing about. Because if, you know, the author is really trusted, but their information is poor, that's not a credible text. You know, it's not a good validation. We can't say it's a good text. So in our first example, again, talking about the Japan Times, Lita, the journalist, has written a lot about different issues, but she's not a text expert. And the article has good firsthand evidence and testimony, but it doesn't talk about the negatives of healthcare robots. And So it's just a narrow perspective. It only talks about the benefits, and it's also just about Japan. So that's objectively in the text. Anybody that reads that text would come to that conclusion, so it's objective. It's about just credibility. Now, evaluation is subjective, and it's about quality. You're weighing whether the source is good or bad. So you could do that either way. Now, this is an exam, right? These skills are going to be on our exam. Normally they're in May. Who knows in this time? But in the exam, your job is to evaluate a text and support it with evidence that you see in the text. So you could support either one of these statements, and it would be true. So you can be right in multiple ways with evaluation and judgment, which is why they're subjective, which is why they're not objective. So everybody's validation is the same. You can't make up something about the Japan Times. Like, you either find it or you don't. Like, everybody's going to find the same thing. But again, evaluation and judgment, what you see. So you could say this source is weak because it's unbalanced and it only shows the positive side and it's just Japan. Or you can use that same evidence and say this is a strong source because it directly communicates like the benefits of this technology in one country. It shows a whole story. It's not theoretical, it's practical, and shows real users. So in this first statement, I'm saying that's a bad thing, and in the second statement, I'm saying that's a good thing. Subjective. You can support it either way, depending on how you use it also. So finally, judgment is coming to like a final conclusion based on the objective and subjective analysis that you just did and the text's structure, the arguments, claims, and evidence it supports. Is it strong or weak for the perspective that it's communicating? And if you go back to the PACE document at the top, you'd see the perspective. So one way you could judge this first example text is that it's a strong source for the perspective because it provides that personal insight, which is good. If you were writing a research paper about Japan's use of robotics in healthcare, hello, this would be a good source for you because it has all of that firsthand material. But if you're writing a research question about, the application of healthcare robots when it crosses a legal or ethical boundary, this isn't going to be a good source for you. This is a weak source because it doesn't have an expert perspective. The only expert there is really the user, which isn't really an academic expert in the sense like that we normally know the word expert. So there's no like tech experts, nobody designing the robotics, that kind of thing. And it lacks a global perspective. So again, if you were writing just about the dangers of robots around the globe, this would be a poor source for you. So again, using the same evidence to support either one of your claims. Like, these are claims too. Like, all this argument language is kind of everywhere. So that is the VEG template and the 3 text analysis terms that you need for the class. And if this sounds difficult, it kind of is. It's a life skill that we grow, and you'll get better throughout the year. And some of it we do instinctually, and so to break it down into steps and to create a template around it just makes it seem a bit more difficult, but give yourself some grace and some patience, and we'll just keep getting better. So let me know if you have any questions.